The Witchcraft Craze vs. the Holocaust by Azure-Lynne. The marginalization and oppression during the witchcraft craze and the Holocaust were both justified through the oppressors believing in certain ideas and convincing others that they were correct, and because they were following orders of the supreme leaders and did not want to seem unfit to do the job or oppose their higher chain of command. The victimized demographic of the witchcraft craze were females who had roles in society such as cooks, midwives, or healers. It was easier to blame these professions if a person or animal died or got hurt with relation to one of these jobs. These females also were single and poor and were believed to have made a deal with the devil to achieve these magical powers. The accusers during this time, the people who would convince witch hunters and common people that a person was a witch, were people who were following the malus maleficarum, saw a woman doing something that seemed evil or devilish, or these accusers had another motive to have a specific individual or group of people to be targeted as a witch. At the time, the church believed that there was a devilry corruption taking place on earth. It is safe to say the church was insecure in the fact that these witches were challenging the spiritual authority. Therefore, the church set out for this to be stopped. Witch hunters abided by the malus maleficarum and by believing that they were doing the work of God and satisfying the church's needs. The malus maleficarum, which in Latin translates to the hammer for witches, was the main guide for how to identify, interrogate, and convict witches. For a while after this book was published, it was the second most sold book, following the Bible. The marginalization and oppression of the other, in this case witchcraft, developed through different beliefs and constructing rules for which people would fit into this category. During this medieval time period, the beliefs of women making a pact with the devil and the gathering of witches were held by people who held higher statuses and who were literate. These people began to spread to other ruling classes. It was easier for them to believe that peasants or people belonging to poorer classes were participating in these activities because they were believed it was a part of their mentality to crave something more than the social position that they are in at the moment. The oppressors that believed in the diabolical doings of witches were men of the ruling elites that had power in the judiciary system to do something about it, which is how the witch craze started to arise. In order for the oppression to begin, the ruling classes needed to believe that the witches were working together in larger numbers, conspiring against people with the devil backing them up. They were more concerned about how the witches were using their pact to harm others rather than the pact itself. The elite who believed in the pact that the women made with the devil also believed in the idea that they worshipped him and they were involved in acts with the devil that were deemed unholy and blasphemous. This was known as the Witches' Sabbath. The construction of the Witches' Sabbath played a large part of the development of the oppression because the acts in which the women were accused of participating in had a direct opposition and mocked the Christian and Catholic faith. The knowledge gathered started to spread, and people began noticing the similarities of the beliefs and the acts that the people were doing. It began to spread by the judicial system forcing confessions, which meant their beliefs were proven. It began to spread by witch trials, and then through word of mouth, and then it was written down. The oppression also began to develop when the Malus Maleficarum was published, and although it wasn't the main reason why this oppression began, it definitely helped because it gave the inquisitors a type of handbook to follow when a witch was accused or should be accused. The groups were able to justify their beliefs and doings through a couple of reasons. The first being that the witch hunters believed that they were doing the work of Christ, and that they were essentially cleansing the world of the devil and his workers. The groups believed that what they were doing was for the greater good and essentially protecting others from harm. The common people who were told these beliefs were also given evidence through confessions of witches, which gave them more reason to believe that what the elites were telling them was true. In the Salem witch trials, the accusers were young girls who were trying to keep in the good graces of the officials by accusing witches of harming them, when in actuality they were framing them so they could continue to please them. They were also afraid to say that they were lying because they did not want to disappoint or be known as liars to the public, who were already afraid of what was happening. The tactics that the oppressors would use to convince the common people that the witches were out to harm them were by using literate people reading sermons about witchcraft to the public. They also tortured the witches into confessing, and then they would execute them by hanging or being burned alive. The oppressors also would use different witchcraft tests to determine if they were a witch or not. A lot of the times, the women being tortured would end up confessing because they did not want to be tortured anymore, or they were protecting their family. The Holocaust. The other in the Holocaust were the Jews. Through the rise of Hitler and his anti-Semitism mentality, he believed that Jews were a race and were unfit to be a group of worthy people. He arose to power and started the Nazi Party, who were the oppressors and the followers of Hitler. Through his commands and his beliefs, he had them sent out to a 1-month class about why they need to keep the purity of the blood and maintain Germany's power. Through the rise of his power and the creation of the Nuremberg Laws and other laws that prohibited Jews from any social and human rights, Hitler was able to control large armies to carry out his final solution. He began to kill off Jews as a cleansing tactic and created death camps to speed up the process. Hitler was able to use the depression of the loss from World War I to take advantage of the government and citizens' emotions to gain power and become a dictator. Through his power, he was able to control the law enforcement. The oppressors justified their actions through their beliefs that the Jews were unfit to be a worthy race and they weren't meant to live, and they were also told to be backstabbing liars as well. The officers were following directions of their leader, who was in charge of all military forces, and if they did not oblige by his rules and commands, they were arrested and charged with treason. That was another reason why many were afraid to oppose him, which is why they just followed his rule. The tactics used to oppress the Jews were through killing of the Jews in their homes and creating laws which they need to abide by. Since this mass murder of Jews weren't going fast enough, Hitler created concentration camps such as Auschwitz and Birkenau to house them in large numbers. In these camps, they disguised gas and cremation chambers as showers, and they used propaganda to convince the Germans that they were living happily in these places. In these places, they died through diseases as well. Also, many Nazi doctors performed experiments on the Jews and tortured them.